Welcome back, focused learners, to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a concept that gives, honestly, a lot of people a massive grammar headache, and we're completely decoding it. We are talking about Lesson 22, the passive voice. Now, we aren't just going to look at this as some dusty old grammar rule you have to memorize. No way. We're going to see it for what it truly is, a remarkably powerful stylistic tool that literally changes how a reader experiences your writing.
So, have you ever read a scientific paper or maybe a really formal report and just wondered, why does this sound so cold? Like, why does academic writing sound so incredibly impersonal? It feels completely different from a novel or a blog post, right? Well, there's a very specific reason for that, and it is definitely not an accident. Okay, let's dive right in and start uncovering exactly how academics and scientists create that distinct, objective sound.
Section 1. The mechanics, flipping the camera.
To really understand how writers create that objective sound, I want you to imagine the author as a film director. Seriously, think about it. Every time you construct a sentence, you're basically holding a camera. Consider the basic definitions. The active voice describes what the subject of a sentence does. The subject is the absolute star of the show. The passive voice, on the other hand, uses the verb to be plus a past participle to describe what happens to the subject. It's a fundamental grammatical flip. Let's ground this with a really concrete example.
Think about the active sentence. Jane Austen wrote Pride and Prejudice. The camera's pointing directly at our actor, right? The doer, Jane Austen. But listen to what happens when we flip it to the passive voice. Pride and Prejudice was written by Jane Austen. We've just panned the camera. The focus shifts entirely away from the author and squarely onto the object, the book itself. Jane Austen gets pushed all the way to the end of the sentence, or sometimes, she can be dropped from the frame entirely.
Section 2. Directing the reader's focus. Now, this camera shift isn't just a neat little party trick. It's deliberately used in academic texts to direct the reader's focus exactly where the author wants it. Notice how the present simple passive is used when describing facts and processes. When you're explaining a scientific process, who is doing the action usually doesn't matter at all. The passive voice allows the writer to emphasize the action itself or the materials that are actually undergoing the change.
Take a super simple sentence. The sun heats water versus water is heated by the sun. In the passive sentence, the water, which was just the object receiving the action in the active version, literally becomes the grammatical subject. It moves right from the background straight into the foreground. If you're writing a whole paper about water temperature, you want water right at the front of that sentence for sure.
We see this beautifully illustrated in the steps of a complex scientific process, like, say, the formation of a black hole. Black holes are formed by dying stars. Outward pressure is produced by nuclear reactions. Heat is radiated away. By using the passive voice, the text just seamlessly links the steps of this massive cosmic event. The phenomenon, the black hole, the pressure, the heat, matters way more than the observer or the abstract forces causing it. It creates this really smooth, logical flow of objects and actions.
Section 3. Creating objective distance.
But there's actually a deeper layer to all of this. It isn't just about what gets placed at the front of the sentence. It's about the psychological impact of creating an illusion of absolute objectivity. Notice passive reporting verbs. Phrases like, it is believed, it is estimated that, or it has been said. Think about what happens when a writer uses these. They are completely stripping out personal pronouns like I or we. Saying, I estimate that Saudi Arabia holds 18% of global oil reserves sounds like, just one person's opinion. But saying, it is estimated that, suddenly that claim feels like a universal truth. It distances the writer from the claim and makes the text feel incredibly impersonal and ultimately objective. So the absolutely crucial point here is summarized perfectly in a quote from our source text. It notes that impersonalized forms typically conceal the source of epistemic judgments by use of sentence adverbs, impersonal pronouns, or passive voice. In plain English, the passive voice is a deliberate shield. It protects the writer's objective tone by completely concealing exactly who is making the judgment. It's basically a fancy way of saying, hey, don't look at me, look at the data.
Section 4. The power of omission.
Okay, so we've talked about moving the doer to the end of the sentence, but often the passive voice allows us to just eliminate them entirely, creating this kind of missing subject. So how do we spot this? Well, the sources give us a highly practical trick. I like to call it the who-by test. Whenever you're reading an academic text and you spot an action, just ask yourself, who by? For example, if the text says, the mixture is heated to 100 degrees, ask yourself, heated, who by? By the scientist, obviously. If the agent is obvious, unimportant, or maybe even unknown, the passive voice lets the writer just drop them entirely, keeping the sentence incredibly streamlined.
And this divide between different academic disciplines is just fascinating. Consider texts written about Samuel Morse. When we look at history, we almost always use the active voice because we care about the person, right? Samuel Morse invented the telegraph. But look at the scientific perspective. You'll read things like, the messages were sent, dots and dashes were tapped, the message was received. Science focuses on the machine, the invention, the product itself. The trained operator tapping the keys, they just fade right into the background.
So, let's pull the whole shebang together. Why do we use the passive voice? 1. To keep our readers' focus totally glued to abstract ideas and objects. 2. To avoid mentioning the agent when they're obvious or unimportant. And 3. To create a powerful sense of objective distance, making our writing feel factual and universally true. Once you grasp these reasons, the passive voice stops being this, grammar mistake to avoid and becomes a highly deliberate stylistic choice you can actually wield in your own work.
Let's think about one final comparison to really hammer this home. Entrepreneurs identify opportunities versus opportunities are identified by entrepreneurs. Neither of these is right or wrong. They're literally just different lenses on the exact same camera. The active voice celebrates the creator, the entrepreneur, while the passive voice elevates the creation, the opportunity. It is entirely up to you, the writer, to decide what you want your audience to care about most.
Which leaves us with a rather profound question to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. We've seen how the passive voice engineers this incredible sense of distance and hard fact. But is ultimate objectivity ever truly possible in writing? Or is the passive voice just a clever linguistic disguise we use to make our own subjective choices look like undeniable truths? Next time you read an academic paper, I challenge you to look for the hidden doers and ask yourself what the author is choosing to show you and what they are choosing to hide. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.